Pilot certification in the United States is typically required for an individual to act as a pilot of an aircraft. It is regulated by the Federal Aviation Administration, a branch of the Department of Transportation. A pilot is certified under the authority of Parts 61 or 141 of Title 14 of the Code of Federal Regulations, also known as the Federal Aviation Regulations. An FAA-issued pilot certificate is evidence that an individual is duly authorized to exercise piloting privileges. The pilot certificate is one of several kinds of airman certificates issued by the FAA. General structure of certification: a pilot is certified to fly aircraft at one or more named privilege levels and, at each privilege level, rated to fly aircraft of specific categories. Privilege levels of pilot certificates are, in order of increasing privilege: student pilot, an individual who is learning to fly under the tutelage of a flight instructor and who is permitted to fly alone under specific, limited circumstances; sport pilot, an individual who is authorized to fly only light sport aircraft; recreational pilot, an individual who may fly aircraft of up to 180 horsepower and 4 seats in the daytime for pleasure only; private pilot, an individual who may fly for pleasure or personal business, generally without accepting compensation; commercial pilot, an individual who may, with some restrictions, fly for compensation or hire; airline transport pilot, an individual authorized to act as pilot for a scheduled airline. Pilots can be rated in these aircraft categories: airplane, rotorcraft, glider, lighter than air, powered lift, powered parachute, weight shift control. Most aircraft categories are further broken down into classes. If a category is so divided, a pilot must hold a class rating to operate an aircraft in that class. The airplane category is divided into single-engine land, multi-engine land, single-engine sea, and multi-engine sea classes. The rotorcraft category is divided into helicopter and gyroplane classes. The lighter-than-air category is divided into airship and balloon classes. The powered parachute category is divided into powered parachute land and powered parachute sea. The weight shift control category is divided into weight shift control land and weight shift control sea. A student pilot certificate does not list category or class ratings but is instead endorsed by a flight instructor to confer privileges in specific makes and models of aircraft. A type rating is required in a specific make and model of aircraft if the aircraft weighs more than 12,500 lb at takeoff or is powered by one or more turbojet engines. The Boeing 747, Beechcraft Super King Air 350, and the Hawker Hunter are examples of aircraft that require type ratings. To legally operate under instrument flight rules, a pilot can separately add an instrument rating to a private or commercial certificate. An airline transport pilot implicitly holds an instrument rating, so the instrument rating does not appear on an ATP certificate. The FAA issues instrument ratings separately for airplane and powered lift categories and the helicopter class. Glider and airship pilots may also operate under instrument flight rules under certain circumstances. An individual may hold only one pilot certificate at one time. That certificate may authorize multiple privilege levels distinguished by aircraft category, class or type. For example, an airline transport pilot certificate holder may be permitted to exercise ATP privileges when flying multi-engine land airplanes, but only commercial pilot privileges when flying single-engine land airplanes and gliders. Similarly, a commercial pilot holder with a glider rating may have only private pilot privileges for single-engine land airplanes. The FAA may impose limitations on a pilot certificate if, during training or the practical test, the pilot does not demonstrate all skills necessary to exercise all privileges of a privilege level, category, class or type rating. For example, a holder of a DC-3 type rating who does not demonstrate instrument flying skills during the practical test would be assigned a limitation reading, DC-3. To obtain a certificate or add a rating, a pilot usually has to undergo a course of training with a certificated flight instructor under 14 CFR 61 or enroll at an approved course at a 14 CFR 141 approved flight school. The applicant must accumulate and log specific aeronautical experience, and pass a 3-part examination, a knowledge test, an oral test, and a practical test carried out by either an FAA inspector or a designated pilot examiner. Another form of authorization is an endorsement from a flight instructor that establishes that the certificate holder has received training in specific skill areas that do not warrant a full test, such as the ability to fly a tailwheel-equipped, high-performance, complex, or pressurized airplane. Pilot certificates other than student pilot certificates do not expire, although they may be suspended or revoked by the FAA. However, a pilot must maintain currency a recent flight experience that is relevant to the flight being undertaken. To remain current, every pilot is to undergo a flight review with an instructor every 24 calendar months unless he gains a new pilot certificate or rating in that time or satisfies the flight review requirement using an alternate approved means. For most types of certificate, he must also undergo a medical examination at intervals ranging from 6 months to 5 years, depending on the pilot's age and desired flight privileges. Other currency requirements apply to the carriage of passengers or to flight under instrument flight rules. A medical certificate is not necessary to fly a glider, balloon, or light sport aircraft. An ultralight aircraft may be piloted without a pilot certificate or a medical certificate. In addition to pilot certificates, the FAA issues separate airman certificates for flight engineers, flight instructors, ground instructors, aircraft dispatchers, mechanics, repairmen, parachute riggers, control tower operators, flight navigators, and flight attendants. Pilot training. Most pilots in the U.S. undergo flight training as private individuals with a flight instructor, who may be employed by a flight school. Those who have decided on aviation as a career often begin with an undergraduate aviation-based education. Some pilots are trained in the armed forces, and are issued with civilian certificates based on their military record. Others are trained directly by airlines. The pilot may choose to be trained under Part 61 or Part 141 of the FARs. Part 141 requires that a certified flight school provide an approved, structured course of training, which includes a specified number of hours of ground training. Part 61 sets out a list of knowledge and experience requirements, and is more suitable for students who cannot commit to a structured plan, or for training from freelance instructors. Knowledge tests. Most pilot certificates and ratings require the applicant to pass a knowledge test, also called the written test. The knowledge test results are valid for a period of 2 years, and are usually a prerequisite for practical tests. Resources available to prepare for the knowledge test may be obtained from pilot supply stores or vendors. The exceptions where a knowledge exam is not required for a practical test are for some add-on ratings after the initial license, such as a powered aircraft pilot adding another category rating at the same license level. To take knowledge tests for all pilot certificates and ratings, the applicant must have a sign-off from a ground or flight instructor. These are usually given by an instructor who has taught a ground school course, provided ground instruction or reviewed the applicant's self-study preparations. Certain circumstances don't require sign-offs for some flight instructor or airline transport pilot knowledge tests. Practical tests. All pilot certificates and ratings require a practical test, usually called a checkride. For each practical test, the FAA publishes a practical test standards document that they expect the applicant to study, the flight instructor to teach and evaluate against, and the examiner to use to conduct the exam. A practical test is administered by an FAA inspector or an FAA-designated pilot examiner. The checkride is divided into 2 parts, the oral exam followed by a flight test in the aircraft. Upon successful completion of the practical test, the examiner issues a temporary airman certificate with the new license or rating. To take practical tests for all pilot certificates and ratings, the applicant must have proper logbook endorsements from their flight instructor. Becoming a professional pilot. In aviation, a pilot's level of income and experience are closely related. There are multiple ways to gain the experience required for hire by a scheduled air carrier. Air carriers generally require that the pilot they hire have hours of experience far in excess of the legal minimum. Effective August 1, 2013, All airline pilots must have an Airline Transport Pilot Certificate or an Airline Transport Pilot Certificate with restricted privileges. An ATP allows a pilot to act as the captain or first officer of an airline flight and requires 1,500 hours of total flight time as well as other requirements. See 14 CFR 61.159. An ATP certificate allows a pilot to act as a first officer in a two-pilot crew if they don't meet certain requirements. For example, the total flight time requirement is reduced to as little as 750 hours and the age requirement is reduced to 21 C 14 CFR 61.160. Experience is often gained using these common methods: military training, independent training followed by becoming a part or full-time instructor. A college-level aviation program, in which a bachelor's degree is conferred upon the completion of both flight and classroom coursework. Frequently, upperclassmen are employed as flight instructors for other students. Banner towing, traffic reporting, skydiver pilot, fire patrol, pipeline patrol, aerial photography, glider towing, or other odd jobs in aviation are fairly low-paying and require only the legal minimum experience. Reaching the regulatory 1,200-hour flight time minimum to act as pilot in command under Part 135 on-demand operations is a common means of gaining experience in line operations, weather flying, etc., leading to passenger airline jobs. Pilot certificates: the FAA offers a progression of pilot certificates or licenses. Each license has varying experience and knowledge requirements and has varying privileges and limitations. Student pilot: a student pilot certificate is issued by an aviation medical examiner at the time of the student unregistered trademark's first medical examination. For operations not requiring a medical certificate, a student pilot certificate can be issued by an FAA inspector or an FAA-designated pilot examiner. The student pilot certificate is only required when exercising solo flight privileges. The student certificate is valid until the last day of the month, either 24 months or 60 months after it was issued. Once a student has accrued sufficient training and experience, a CFI can endorse the student certificate to authorize limited solo flight in a specific type. Additional endorsements must be logged for specific airports where a student operates solo. There is no minimum aeronautical knowledge or experience requirement for the issuance of a student pilot certificate other than the medical requirements for the class of medical certificate the student certificate is based upon. There are, however, minimum aeronautical knowledge and experience requirements for student pilots to solo, including, solo requirements: be at least 16 years of age, read, speak, write, and understand the English language. Demonstrate satisfactory aeronautical knowledge on a knowledge test, including knowledge of the following areas: airspace rules and procedures for the airport where the solo flight is performed, flight characteristics and operational limitations for the make and model of aircraft to be flown. Receive and log flight training for the maneuvers and procedures appropriate to the make and model of aircraft to be flown, including pre-flight preparation, taxiing or surface operations, including run-ups, takeoffs and landings, including normal and crosswind, straight and level flight, and turns in both directions, climbs and climbing turns, airport traffic patterns, including entry and departure procedures, collision avoidance, wind shear avoidance, and wake turbulence avoidance, descents, with and without turns, using high and low drag configurations, flight at various airspeeds from cruise to slow flight, stall entries from various flight attitudes and power combinations with recovery initiated at the first indication of a stall, and recovery from a full stall, emergency procedures and equipment malfunctions, ground reference maneuvers, approaches to a landing area with simulated engine malfunctions, slips to a landing, go-arounds. Limitations while flying solo: may not carry passengers, may not fly for hire or in furtherance of a business. May not fly in other than VMC or above clouds when visual reference cannot be made to the surface. May not fly in contrary to limitations placed in logbook by instructor. Sport pilot: the Sport Pilot Certificate was created in September 2004 after years of work by the Experimental Aircraft Association. The intent of the new rule was to lower the barriers of entry into aviation and make flying more affordable and accessible. The new rule also created the light sport aircraft category of aircraft, which are smaller, lower-powered aircraft. The Sport Pilot Certificate offers limited privileges mainly for recreational use. It is the only powered aircraft certificate that does not require a medical certificate. A valid vehicle driver's license can be used as proof of medical competence provided the prospective pilot was not rejected for their last airman medical certificate. Before a trainee can start the solo phase of flight training, a student sport pilot certificate must be issued by the Federal Aviation Administration. These may be obtained from an FAA Flight Standards District Office or FAA-designated pilot examiner. To qualify for the Sport Pilot Certificate, an applicant must be at least 16 years of age, be able to read, speak, write, and understand English, log at least 20 hours of flight time, of which at least 15 hours must be dual instruction with a qualified flight instructor, 2 hours must be cross-country dual instruction. 5 hours must be solo flight. Fly one solo cross-country flight over a total distance of 75 or more nautical miles to 2 different destinations to a full-stop landing. At least one leg of this cross-country must be over a total distance of at least 25 nautical miles. Have received 2 hours of dual instruction in the preceding 60 days, in preparation for the practical test, pass a knowledge test, pass a practical test, have a valid U.S. state driver's license or a current third-class or higher airman medical certificate. The above requirements are for heavier-than-air powered aircraft. The requirements for gliders, balloons, helicopters, and dirigibles vary slightly. Sport pilots are only eligible to fly aircraft that are either certified specifically as light sport aircraft or were certified prior to the LSA regulations and are within the maximum weight and performance limitations of light sport aircraft. The restrictions placed on a pilot exercising the privileges of a sport pilot certificate are, no more than 1 passenger, daytime flight only, maximum takeoff weight of 1320 lbs, compared to 12,500 lb of the private pilot certificate or the recreational pilot certificate. No flight above 10,000 feet MSL or 2,000 feet AGL, whichever is higher. No flight in any of the airspace classes that require radio communication without first obtaining additional instruction and instructor endorsement. The Sport Pilot Certificate is also ineligible for additional ratings, although time in light sport aircraft can be used towards the experience requirement of other ratings on higher certificate types. Recreational Pilot. The Recreational Pilot Certificate requires less training and offers fewer privileges than the Private Pilot Certificate. It was originally created for flying small single-engine planes but has since been largely replaced by the Sport Pilot Certificate. Eligibility requirements: be at least 17 years old, be able to read, speak, write and understand the English language, pass a required knowledge test, pass a required oral and practical flight test administered by a FAA-designated examiner, hold either a student or sport pilot certificate. Meet the following experience requirements: 30 hours of flight time. Limitations and restrictions: may not carry more than 1 passenger, may not fly to an airport further than 50 nmi from the departure point without an instructor endorsement. Once endorsement is received, pilot may fly beyond 50 nanometers. May not fly in Class B, C, D airspace or to any controlled airport without an instructor endorsement. May not fly an aircraft that has more than 4 seats, more than 1 engine, more than 180 horsepower, retractable landing gear or between sunset and sunrise. If pilot has logged less than 400 hours and has not acted as pilot in command within 180 days, a flight review is required. May not fly above 10,000 aft MSL or 2,000 aft AGL. Private pilot. The Private Pilot Certificate is the certificate held by the majority of active pilots. It allows command of any aircraft for any non-commercial purpose, and gives almost unlimited authority to fly under visual flight rules. Passengers may be carried in flight in furtherance of a business as permitted. However, a private pilot may not be compensated in any way for services as a pilot, although passengers can pay a pro rata share of flight expenses, such as fuel or rental costs. Private pilots may also operate charity flights, subject to certain restrictions, and may participate in similar activities, such as Angel Flight, Civil Air Patrol and many others. The requirements to obtain a private pilot certificate for airplane, single engine, land, or ASEL, are, be at least 17 years old, be able to read, speak, write and understand the English language, obtain at least a third-class medical certificate from an aviation medical examiner, pass a computerized aeronautical knowledge test, accumulate and log a specified amount of training and experience, including the following, if training under Part 61, Title 14 of the Code of Federal Regulations Section 61.109, requires at least 40 hours of flight time, including 20 hours of flight with an instructor and 10 hours of solo flight, and other requirements including cross-country flight, which include, solo requirements, 5 hours of solo cross-country time, 1 solo cross-country flight of at least 150 nm total distance, with full-stop landings at a minimum of 3 points and with one segment of the flight consisting of a straight-line distance of at least 50 nm between the takeoff and landing locations, 3 solo takeoffs and landings to a full stop at an airport with an operating control tower. Night requirements, 3 hours of night flight training, 10 takeoffs and 10 landings to a full stop at an airport. 3 hours of flight training on the control and maneuvering solely by reference to instruments, 3 hours of flight training for cross-country flights, 3 hours of flight training with an authorized instructor in preparation for the practical test, which must have been performed within the preceding 2 calendar months from the month of the test. If training under Part 141, at least 35 hours of piloting time including 20 hours with an instructor and 5 hours of solo flight, and other requirements including cross-country and night flights. Pass an oral test and flight test administered by an FAA inspector, FAA-designated examiner, or authorized check instructor, commercial pilot. A commercial pilot may be compensated for flying. Training for the certificate focuses on a better understanding of aircraft systems and a higher standard of airmanship. The commercial certificate itself does not allow a pilot to fly an instrument meteorological conditions. For aircraft categories where an instrument rating is available, commercial pilots without an instrument rating are restricted to daytime flight within 50 nautical miles when flying for hire. A commercial airplane pilot must be able to operate a complex airplane, as a specific number of hours of complex aircraft time are among the prerequisites, and at least a portion of the practical examination is performed in a complex aircraft. The requirements are, be at least 18 years of age, hold a private pilot certificate, be able to read, speak, write, and understand the English language, accumulate and log a specified amount of training and experience. The following are part of the airplane single-engine land class rating requirements. If training under Part 61, at least 250 hours of piloting time including 20 hours of training with an instructor and 10 hours of solo flight, and other requirements including several cross-country flights, that is, more than 50 nautical miles from the departure airport between points, with a time of at least 2 hours. Also 1 solo cross-country of at least 250 nm one-way. 300 nm total distance, with landings at 3 airports, and both solo and instructor-accompanied night flights. If training under Part 141, at least 190 hours of training time including 55 hours with an instructor and 10 hours of solo flight, and other requirements including several cross-country, solo, and night flights. Pass a 100-question aeronautical knowledge test. Pass an oral test and flight test administered by an FAA inspector, FAA-designated examiner, or authorized check instructor. By itself, this certificate does not permit the pilot to set up an operation that carries members of the public for hire. Such operations are governed by other regulations. Otherwise, a commercial pilot can be paid for certain types of operation, such as banner towing, agricultural applications, and photography, and can be paid for instructing if he holds a flight instructor certificate. To fly for hire, the pilot must hold a second-class medical certificate, which is valid for 12 months. Often, the commercial certificate reduces the pilot a €1 registered trademark S insurance premiums, as it is evidence of training to a higher safety standard. Airline Transport Pilot. An airline transport pilot is tested to the highest level of piloting ability. The certificate is a prerequisite for acting as a flight crew member in scheduled airline operations. The minimum pilot experience is 1,500 hours of flight time, 500 hours of cross-country flight time, 100 hours of night flight time, and 75 hours instrument operations time. Other requirements include being 23 years of age, an instrument rating, being able to read, write, speak, and understand the English language, a rigorous written examination, and being of good moral character. An airline transport pilot, restricted, is also available for pilots that do not meet the more rigorous requirements of an ATP. The only hour requirement for the ATPR is 1,500 total and 200 cross-country. The total time requirement is reduced to 750 hours for former military pilots, 1,000 hours for graduates of university bachelor's degree programs, or 1,250 for graduates of university associate's degree programs. The holder of an ATPR is limited to only serving as the first officer in a two-pilot operation. Upon obtaining the requisite age and aeronautical experience, the pilot is issued an unrestricted ATP without further examination. See 14 CFR 61.160 and 14 CFR 61.167, Privileges and Limitations, Number of active pilots. As of the end of 2013, in the U.S., there were an estimated 617,128 active certificated pilots. This number has been declining gradually over the past several decades, down from a high of over 827,000 pilots in 1980. There were 702,659 in 1990 and 581 in 2000. The numbers include 120,285 student pilots, 238 recreational pilots, 4,824 sport pilots, 180,214 private pilots, 108,206 commercial pilots, 149,824 airline transport pilots, 20,381 glider-only pilots, 20,381 rotorcraft, helicopter-only pilots. These numbers are based on the highest certifications held by individual pilots. The numbers also include 98,842 certificated flight instructors, 307,120 pilots overall who held instrument ratings. An active pilot is defined as one who holds both a pilot certificate and a valid medical certificate, for certifications that require a medical certificate. Other certificates and ratings. A flight instructor certificate authorizes the holder to give training and endorsement for a certificate, and perform a flight review. A ground instructor certificate authorizes the holder to give ground instruction, give knowledge exam endorsements, and provide the ground training portion of a flight review. An instrument rating is required to fly under instrument flight rules. Instrument ratings are issued for a specific category of aircraft. A pilot certified to fly an airplane under IFR has an instrument airplane rating. An instrument instructor rating authorizes a certificated flight instructor to give training and endorsement for an instrument rating. A multi-engine rating is required to fly an airplane with more than one engine. It is the most common example of a class rating. A multi-engine instructor rating authorizes a certificated flight instructor to give training and endorsement for a multi-engine rating. United States military pilots are issued an aviator badge upon completion of flight training and issuance of a pilot certificate. Badges for crew or ground positions are also issued to qualified applicants. Medical certification and requirements. All certified pilots, with the exception of those with a sport or recreational pilot certificate, are required to maintain a medical certification commensurate with the privileges they intend to exercise as pilot in command of an aircraft. For sport pilot certificate applicants or holders, regulations state that a medical is required if the applicant pilot does not hold a valid United States driver's license, To obtain a medical certification, pilots are required to undergo a medical examination from an aviation medical examiner, or AME. The aviation medical examiner performs an examination based upon the class of certification desired. Medical certifications are divided into three classes. Third class certifications require the least involved examinations of all medical certifications. They are required for those intending to be pilot in command of an aircraft under the private or recreational pilot certificates or while exercising solo privileges as a student pilot. To qualify for a third-class medical certificate, pilots must meet the following requirements: distant vision, 20/40 or better in each eye separately, with or without correction; near vision, 20/40 or better in each eye separately, with or without correction, as measured at a distance of 16 inches; color vision, demonstrate the ability to perceive the colors necessary for the safe performance of airman duties; hearing, demonstrate the ability to hear an average conversational voice in a quiet room, using both ears, at a distance of 6 feet, with their back turned to the examiner, or pass an approved audiometric test; ear, nose, and throat, exhibit no ear disease or condition manifested by, or that may reasonably be expected to be manifested by, vertigo or a disturbance of speech or equilibrium; blood pressure, under 155/95, mental status, no diagnosis of psychosis, bipolar disorder, or severe personality disorders; substance dependence, no dependence on alcohol or any pharmacological substance in the previous 2 years. For pilots under 40 years of age, third-class medical certificates expire on the last day of the month they were issued, 5 years from the date of issue. The FAA changed this rule from 3 to 5 years on July 24, 2008. For all others, they expire on the last day of the month they were issued, 2 years from the date of issue. Second class. A second-class medical is required for those intending to exercise the privileges of the commercial pilot certificate. It is possible to obtain a commercial pilot certificate while holding a third-class medical, but the licensee cannot exercise privileges beyond that of a private pilot. To qualify for a second-class medical certificate, pilots must meet the requirements for the third-class certificate plus, distant vision, 20/20 or better in each eye separately, with or without correction; intermediate vision, 20/40 or better in each eye separately, with or without correction, at age 50 and over, as measured at 32 inches. Second-class certificates are valid until the last day of the month, 12 months after they were issued. The certificate holder may then only exercise the privileges of a third-class medical certificate. First class certificates are required for those intending to be pilot in command in an air carrier operation requiring an airline transport pilot certificate. Other operations, including those under Part 91, may require a first-class medical for insurance purposes, although it is not a federal requirement in such cases. To qualify for the first-class medical certificate, pilots must meet the requirements for the third and second-class certificates plus, heart function. Electrocardiogram must show normal heart function once at age 35 and annually for those age 40 and over. For pilots under 40 years of age, first-class medical certificates expire on the last day of the month they were issued, 1 year from the date of issue. The FAA introduced this rule on July 24, 2008. For all others, they are valid until the last day of the month, 6 months after they were issued. The certificate holder may then only exercise the privileges of a second-class medical certificate until the last day of the month, 12 months after the certificate was issued, thereafter the privileges of a third-class medical until the last day of the month, 24 months after the medical was issued. Special issuance. Pilots who do not meet the above requirements may be issued a medical certificate under a special issuance. A special issuance is essentially a waiver for a disqualifying condition and are evaluated case by case depending on the class of certificate requested. Minor problems can be overcome by a special issuance from an aviation medical examiner, while others require a special issuance from the FAA directly. Restrictions may be placed upon a medical certificate to mitigate any concern for safety. A common restriction for pilots who require glasses or contacts to meet the required visual acuity standards is that they must wear corrective lenses. Color-blind pilots are typically issued a restriction reading, not valid for night flight or by color signal control. This mitigates the concern that color-blind pilots may not be able to identify those colors required for the performance of safe airman duties by preventing situations that are considered potentially unsafe. For color-blind pilots, in many cases these restrictions can be removed through use of an FAA-approved alternative office-based color vision test, which if passed, the applicant must continue to retake that same test at every renewal. If the pilot applicant is unable to pass any of the office-based tests, a real-world operational test is available. This test consists of a ground-based chart reading and signal light test for third class, and in addition to that, a specialized medical flight test is required for second and first classes, in which the applicant performs an actual flight test with an FAA-designated pilot examiner for the purpose of further demonstrating the ability to perceive those colors necessary for the safe performance of airmen duties. If passed, a letter of evidence from the FAA is issued, which indicates that the pilot's deficiency is of no concern. This allows the pilot to receive a medical certificate with no restrictions at every subsequent renewal. Non-pilot certifications. In addition to pilot licenses, the FAA also issues other airmen certificates. Flight instructor certification is separate from pilot certification. For every rating on a flight instructor certificate, there must already be a corresponding rating on the individual's commercial pilot certificate. The applicant must also pass written and flight skills tests. Flight engineer certifications are applicable to large transportation aircraft. Flight engineer certificates are further rated by type of engine they are trained and tested on: turbojet-powered, turbopropeller-powered, reciprocating engine-powered. Flight engineers are becoming less common as modern jets move towards two-person flight crews. Flight navigator certificates are still available, but modern technology and the high speed of jets has made the rating obsolete. Aviation medical examiner, ground instructor, parachute rigger, aircraft maintenance technician, repairman and air traffic controller are also federally certified aviation-related positions. Most of these also have their rating systems. For example, an A&P is a certified mechanic with both airframe and power plant ratings, and a ground instructor may be rated to give basic, advanced, and/or instrument training. Aircraft inspection authorization is an additional privilege conferred on certificated mechanics who meet specific experience and training requirements. An aircraft dispatcher certificate is required for people involved in operational control dispatch under 14 CFR Part 121 commercial operations. Qualification requirements can be found in FAR 65.53. Pilots do not need FCC licenses to use the radio within the United States. However, other countries may require that a pilot have an FCC-restricted radio telephone operator permit, and the aircraft radio station be licensed. Flight attendants are trained to the level required to earn an FAA certificate of demonstrated proficiency. This is not considered to be an airman certification. Avionics techs. General radio telephone operator license or are certified by the FCC. See also, glider pilot license, ultralight aviation, paragliding, alien flight student program, Civil Aerospace Medical Institute, references. External links, Federal Aviation Administration, How to become a pilot, types of licenses, how to get your commercial pilot license, FAA Regulation Library. Pilot Certification Regulations can be found at Parts 61 and 141. Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, AOPA page describing the basics of obtaining a pilot certificate, AOPA Aviation Statistics page.